Support for Radio Friends comes from IT Como, offering computer and IT services for small businesses and residential clients. IT Como can set up remote work-at-home solutions and data security and backup systems, and upgrade your company email to more modern platforms. IT Como can also help you get the most from your technology at home. Learn more at itcomo.com. Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, May the 12th. Good to have you with us today. And you know this weekend is Mother's Day. So what does that mean? Today, the couple of days before Mother's Day, we have Larry Brown with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to have you here. Singer, songwriter, storyteller. Today you're wearing the storyteller hat.
Which is usually the tradition for our Mother's Day show.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have a special Mother's Day story.
I have a story about a mother, another mother.
All right, so here is Larry Brown with a story in honor of Mother's Day.
At the time of the coming of the Europeans to North America, the Osage people were the dominant group of indigenous folks that had the Ozarks and most of in Missouri. And they initially had a very positive relationship with the French in trading. And they were admired by Europeans because they were tall, healthy, had warriors, they had organized, very articulate. And so not only were the Osage fascinated by Europeans, but Europeans were fascinated by them. In fact, in 1725, a trader by the name of de Bourmont came up the Missouri, made contact with the Osage, and had established such positive relationships that he took back to France with him for a visit representatives of the Osage people, the Missouri people, the Illinois Confederacy, and some Oto. Well, it was about 1809 that a girl was born that became the woman that we sometimes know as Mihonga or Homongo, or translated, Sacred Son. And she was born into the Osage community, probably what's today Saline County, born in 1809. Well, in 1827, another Frenchman from St. Louis came to visit the Osage and convinced them that they ought to take a delegation back to France. And since they'd had positive relationships earlier, they agreed. And so 6 people went, Sacred Son and her husband, Blackbird, a man whose translated name would mean Little Chief, and his wife, Hawkwoman, and then 2 other young men. One was called Young or Little Soldier, and the other called Big Soldier. Again, those are English translations of their names. And they made the trip to St. Louis, rendezvoused there with 3 French men, one of them named David de Launay, and another named Louis, and another Tesson. And they agreed to take them to France. So they went down the Mississippi, actually sailing on a steamboat that was called the Commerce. And then they went to France on a boat called New England. They arrived in France and were just warmly greeted. The French people were so excited by these people, and Sacred Son herself, 18 years old, just married to her husband Blackbird, who was on the trip as well. Well, they saw Sacred Son and the way she was dressed and her colorful red coat, and the way her hair was done, and with a purple line down the point of where her braids separated, and the kind of felt and fur-covered shoes that she had. Well, they were just fascinated by her, and she was a very attractive, small-statured woman. Well, they were just wined and dined all over France. Now, David de Launay was escorting them here and there, taking them places. And they went to operas and to theaters, and in fact, they wind up touring a number of cities in Europe. They were in Amsterdam and Dresden and Frankfurt and Berlin, and making their way over the next several months. But little did they know that de Launay, the French who had got them there, really was making money off of this. But indeed, he had been losing money. He was charging admission to come see these people. Now, the French people said they were the Missouri Majesties, just in love with them. But he wound up being so much in debt that he was arrested for his indebtedness and left these people stranded in Europe. Well, while this was going on, Sacred Son gave birth to twin daughters. And they were born in a hotel in Belgium. And a French woman adopted one of those because of their situation, and they're traveling around Europe, Maria Teresa. And the other, Maria Elizabeth, traveled with Sacred Son and her husband Blackbird. Well, it began to be a desperate situation. They essentially had been abandoned in Europe and having to beg for food and places to stay. And they decided to divide their group into half. So Sacred Son and her husband Blackbird and one of the younger men called Young Soldier, the three of them, and Little Chief and his wife and Big Soldier made a separate group trying to make their way. Well, their reports of their whole journey were coming out in pamphlets and magazines, and there's when we discovered that de Launay had made up this whole story about how he had rescued them back in Missouri when they had been making their way down the river and lost their furs and so on, and he had stepped up and saved them, and now, of course, it was all made up. Well, news of their plight got to the Marquis de Lafayette, who was the Revolutionary War hero for us in the United States. And he booked passage for Sacred Son and her husband and Little Soldier. They got to the boat leaving from Le Havre, France, and their luggage was confiscated because now there were debts in their name. The tragedy of the story was, as they were crossing the Atlantic, Sacred Son's husband, Blackbird, died of smallpox, and so did the other young man with them. So she arrives back in Norfolk, Virginia, with a toddler and nothing, desperate. And so here she was now in the United States in the same plight. But fortunately, William McKinney, who was Superintendent of Indian Affairs, heard of her story, got her to Washington, D.C. They actually met Andrew Jackson and had her portrait done by Charles Bird King. And that's the picture I want to put up here. So her portrait became famous, and with her child. And she is wearing the Peace Medal that was given to her by President Jackson. Well, she eventually was able to make her way back to the Osage Territory, which was now Indian Territory, what became Kansas and Missouri. Sadly, she died young, but her story of a noble and caring and powerful woman exists.
That's an interesting story and tragic.
Tragic, but she still is an icon of powerful mothers.
Thank you, Larry. Larry Brown, and happy Mother's Day to all of our moms out there. We send our love to you. All right. Bye-bye.